There's a moment when you realize that everyone around you is bleeding out in public, and you're the only one who learned to keep your wounds sealed. They're all talking, explaining, defending, reacting, spilling themselves across every surface like water from a broken dam. And you sit in perfect stillness, watching the spectacle of their self-destruction with the calm of someone who discovered the most dangerous secret of all. That power isn't what you do. It's what you don't do. Most people believe power is action. They think it's the raised voice, the decisive strike, the dramatic gesture that commands attention. They're wrong, catastrophically wrong. Power is the pause before you speak. Power is the breath you take while they unravel. Power is the space between their attack and your response, a space so vast and controlled that it becomes its own form of violence. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. But he revealed something deeper in his observation. Fear doesn't come from what you might do. It comes from what you refuse to reveal. The prince who shows all his cards loses before the game begins. The prince who keeps his hand hidden controls not just the game, but the very rules by which it's played. Consider how most people handle conflict. Someone attacks their competence in a meeting, their face flushes, their voice rises, they rush to defend, to explain, to prove their worth through a torrent of words and justifications. Within seconds, they've handed their attacker every weapon needed to destroy them. They've shown their insecurities, revealed their pressure points, demonstrated exactly how to hurt them next time. You've learned differently. When they question your competence, you let 3 seconds of silence expand like a universe between their words and your response. You maintain eye contact, not the desperate pleading eye contact of someone seeking approval, but the steady gaze of someone assessing whether they're worth your attention. Then you speak, your voice lower than theirs, slower than theirs, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I see. Nothing more. Watch what happens to their confidence when you refuse to engage with their framework of attack. This isn't passive aggression. This isn't withdrawal or defeat. This is something far more sophisticated, the weaponization of self-possession. You've discovered that the strongest position isn't to counter their move, but to refuse to play their game entirely. When you don't defend, they have nothing to attack. When you don't explain, they have nothing to dismantle. When you don't react, they have nothing to predict or control. The digital age has made this principle both more obvious and more powerful. Social media is a gladiatorial arena where people perform their own destruction daily. Watch them. Someone posts a controversial opinion, and within minutes, they're deep in the comments, frantically explaining their position, qualifying their statements, defending themselves against strangers who will never be satisfied. Each response makes them weaker. Each clarification reveals another vulnerability. Each defensive move confirms that the original attack hit its mark. You post differently. When someone attacks your position online, you don't engage, not because you can't formulate a response. You could destroy them with precision that would make them question their own existence, but because engagement itself is admission of their importance in your universe. Instead, you might like a comment from someone defending you, or better yet, you post something entirely unrelated an hour later, demonstrating that their existence doesn't even register as a disturbance in your digital ecosystem. The psychology here is devastating. When you refuse to acknowledge their attack, you deny them the validation they desperately seek. They didn't just fail to wound you, they failed to prove they exist in your awareness. This creates a psychological void that most people cannot tolerate. They'll escalate, becoming increasingly desperate and obvious in their attempts to provoke you, and with each escalation, they expose more of their own desperation to anyone watching. Here's what they don't understand. Attention is the currency of power, and you've learned to be extraordinarily selective about where you spend it. Every reaction you give validates their importance. Every defense you mount confirms their ability to affect you. Every explanation you offer suggests they have the right to question you. By withholding these responses, you create a psychological dynamic where they're constantly reaching for something you refuse to provide. This principle scales upward into professional environments with surgical precision. The corporate world is filled with people performing competence rather than embodying it. They over-explain their decisions, oversell their achievements, over-communicate their value. They're essentially bleeding competence all over the floor, leaving a trail that anyone can follow back to their insecurities. Picture this scenario. You're in a board meeting. Someone challenges your quarterly strategy, implying you haven't considered obvious risks. The room goes quiet. Everyone expects you to launch into a detailed defense, to prove you've done your homework, to demonstrate your thoroughness through exhaustive explanation. Instead, you pause. You take a slow sip of water. You look at the challenger with mild interest, as if they've just shared a mildly amusing observation about the weather. Then you say, "The risks you're concerned about have been integrated into the projections." No elaboration, no defensive statistics, no anxious clarification. Just a statement delivered with the confidence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The room's dynamic shifts immediately. Your challenger, expecting a long explanation they could pick apart, suddenly has nothing to attack. Your confidence suggests depths of knowledge and preparation that they can only guess at. Other people in the room begin to wonder what you know that they don't. The absence of defense becomes its own form of evidence. Evidence of such thorough preparation and deep understanding that detailed explanations would be redundant. This is where Machiavelli's insight becomes surgical. Never was anything great achieved without danger. But he also understood that the greatest danger often comes from revealing too much, too early, to people who haven't earned the right to your complete thoughts. The executive who explains every decision gives their competitors a roadmap to their thinking. The leader who justifies every choice teaches their subordinates exactly how to challenge them next time. But here's where it transcends simple strategy and becomes philosophy. This isn't just about winning meetings or maintaining professional dominance. This is about the fundamental nature of human psychology and power dynamics. People are drawn to mystery and repelled by over-explanation. They respect what they cannot fully understand and dismiss what they can completely predict. Think about the people who command natural authority in your life. They're not the ones who talk the most, or explain the most, or justify themselves the most. They're the ones who speak carefully, choose their words with precision, and leave you feeling like you've only seen the surface of what they know. Their restraint creates a gravitational field of curiosity and respect. Now consider romantic relationships, where this principle becomes both more delicate and more powerful. The dating landscape is littered with people who reveal everything about themselves within the first 3 conversations. They share their insecurities, their past relationships, their fears, their dreams, their daily routines, their political opinions, their family drama, essentially downloading their entire psychological operating system into someone they barely know. You've learned to move differently. When someone you're interested in asks personal questions, you answer, but never completely. You give them a glimpse, not a view. You share a story that reveals character but leaves them wanting more context. You demonstrate depth without showing them the bottom. This isn't deception, it's curation. You're not hiding who you are. You're controlling the pace at which you reveal yourself. The psychological effect is intoxicating. Most people are so used to others oversharing that your restraint feels like discovering a locked room in a house they thought they knew completely. They become fascinated by what you're not saying, more interested in the questions you don't answer than the ones you do. Your emotional unavailability, rather than pushing them away, draws them deeper into wanting to understand you. When they share their problems, you listen without rushing to offer solutions. When they share their successes, you acknowledge without competing. When they share their fears, you receive without minimizing. This creates a dynamic where they're constantly giving you information about their inner landscape while you remain comfortably mysterious. They begin to project onto your silence qualities and depths that may or may not exist, building you into someone more interesting than you might actually be. But then comes the test, They'll probe your boundaries, either consciously or unconsciously. They might make a cutting comment about something they perceive as a vulnerability. They might question your choices, your background, your motivations. This is where most people collapse into explanation and defense. You don't. You receive their probe with the same calm attention you'd give someone asking about the weather. You might say, "That's an interesting perspective," or simply, and then redirect the conversation or move into comfortable silence. What they experience in that moment is the collision with something immovable. Not hostile, not defensive, not affected, just immovable. Like pushing against a mountain. The mountain doesn't push back, doesn't get angry, doesn't explain why it's there. It simply continues being a mountain, and their push reveals only their own expenditure of energy. Here's exactly how this works in practice. They say, "You never really talk about your family. Are you hiding something?" Most people would launch into explanation, No, it's not that I'm hiding anything, it's just that my family is complicated, and I don't like to burden people with my issues, and honestly, my relationship with my parents is..." You respond, "I prefer to keep some things private." The conversation ends there, not because you shut it down aggressively, but because your statement is complete and requires no further clarification. The result is that they learn your boundaries exist and are non-negotiable, but they also learn that testing them doesn't result in drama or punishment, just a gentle, immovable resistance. This creates safety paradoxically through mystery. They know they can't manipulate or pressure you, which means they can trust that your interest in them is genuine rather than neediness disguised as affection. This principle extends into group social dynamics with mathematical precision. Every friend group has its dynamics, its unspoken hierarchies, its patterns of influence and submission. Most people jockey for position through various forms of social display. They're funnier, more successful, more dramatic, more knowledgeable, more connected. They compete by addition, adding more personality, more stories, more opinions, more reactions to everything. You compete by subtraction. You become influential by taking up less space, not more. When the group discusses someone's relationship drama, you listen rather than offering immediate advice. When they debate politics, you ask questions rather than declaring positions. When they plan activities, you express preferences without lobbying for them. You become the person everyone unconsciously checks for approval because you've trained them to value your attention through its scarcity. Watch what happens in group conversations. Someone tells a story and everyone else immediately jumps in with their own related story, competing for attention and relevance. You respond with genuine curiosity. What happened after that? Or how did that make you feel? Instead of redirecting attention to yourself, you deepen their moment in the spotlight. The psychological effect is that they associate talking to you with feeling heard and understood, while talking to others feels like competition. But here's where it becomes dangerous. They begin to seek your approval, specifically because they can't easily obtain it. Not because you're withholding or manipulative, but because your standards appear higher and your attention appears more valuable. They start modifying their behavior based on what they think will earn your regard. They begin self-editing in your presence, trying to present their best selves. You've essentially reverse-engineered influence. Instead of pushing your agenda on them, you've created conditions where they want to align with what they imagine your agenda might be. Instead of demanding their respect, you've made your respect worth earning. Instead of fighting for your place in the hierarchy, you've made the hierarchy reorganize itself around your gravitational pull. The workplace applications of this are almost unfairly effective. Every office has its politics, its competing personalities, its constant low-level warfare for resources and recognition. Most people engage in this warfare through various forms of professional peacocking. They speak up in every meeting, volunteer for every visible project, share every achievement, defend every decision. You approach it like a chess master who sees the entire board. When colleagues are arguing about resource allocation, you listen without taking sides. When they're competing for the boss's attention, you focus on delivering results quietly. When they're gossiping about management decisions, you neither participate nor criticize their participation. You simply have other things to focus on. This creates a fascinating dynamic. Because you're not perceived as competition in the traditional sense, people begin to trust you with information they wouldn't share with others. Because you don't rush to judgment or offer unsolicited advice, they start seeking your perspective on their professional dilemmas. Because you don't participate in office drama, you become a safe harbor in an environment of constant political turbulence. Here's a specific example of how this plays out. The team is discussing a failed project, and people are assigning blame and defending their contributions. Someone tries to drag you into it. What do you think went wrong with the Johnson account? The expected response would be to analyze, blame, or defend. Your response? I think we learned what we needed to learn. It's not evasive, it's reframing. You've acknowledged the situation without participating in the blame game, demonstrated a forward-thinking perspective, and avoided giving anyone ammunition to use against you later. The result is that you're increasingly seen as leadership material, not because you've campaigned for leadership, but because you've demonstrated the emotional regulation and strategic thinking that leadership requires. You've shown you can maintain perspective under pressure, avoid getting dragged into unproductive conflicts, and focus on outcomes rather than ego protection. Machiavelli observed that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But he also understood the reverse. The quality of people drawn to you reflects your own gravitational field. When you operate from this place of contained power, you naturally attract people who respect depth, appreciate mystery, and value substance over performance. This is where the philosophy becomes existential. You've discovered something that most people never learn, that your inner life is your most valuable possession, and access to it should be earned, not assumed. Most people live with their emotional doors wide open, letting anyone walk through and rearrange their mental furniture. They react to every provocation, respond to every question, defend against every criticism, explain every choice. You've learned to live differently. You've sealed those doors, not from fear or defensiveness, but from understanding that your emotional energy is finite and precious. When someone tries to provoke you, they're essentially asking for a piece of your inner life. When they demand explanations, they're requesting access to your decision-making process. When they challenge your choices, they're attempting to make you accountable to their value system. You've learned to decline these requests politely but firmly, not because you're antisocial or superior, but because you understand that every piece of yourself you give away to unworthy recipients is a piece you can't give to worthy ones. Every emotional reaction you spend on meaningless provocations is energy you can't invest in meaningful pursuits. Every justification you offer to people who haven't earned explanations is attention diverted from people who deserve your full presence. This creates what appears to be a paradox, but is actually a law of psychological physics. The less you need validation from others, the more they want to give it to you. The less you seek approval, the more valuable your approval becomes. The less you reveal about yourself, the more interesting you become. The less you defend your positions, the stronger they appear. Consider the person who constantly posts about their achievements on social media, explains their choices to anyone who questions them, seeks reassurance for their decisions, and defends their lifestyle to critics. They appear weak, not because their achievements, choices, or lifestyle are questionable, but because their need for external validation is so visible. Their strength is constantly leaking out through their need to prove it. Now consider someone who accomplishes things quietly, makes decisions without seeking group approval, and remains unbothered by criticism. They appear strong, not necessarily because their achievements are greater, but because their self-contained confidence is so obvious. Their strength is evident in their lack of need to demonstrate it. This is the deeper game you've learned to play. While others are competing for external validation, you're building internal authority. While they're seeking approval from the crowd, You're developing the kind of self-possession that makes crowds seek your approval. While they're defending their worth to anyone who questions it, you're becoming the kind of person whose worth is self-evident. But here's where it becomes truly sophisticated. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected or superior. It's about becoming so secure in your own foundation that you can engage with others from a place of genuine strength rather than disguised neediness. When you don't need their approval, you can give them your authentic attention. When you're not defending yourself, you can truly listen to them. When you're not competing for validation, you can genuinely celebrate their successes. The relationships you build from this foundation are qualitatively different. People sense that your interest in them is pure, not contaminated by your own insecurities or agenda. They feel safe with you because they sense you're not trying to take anything from them or prove anything to them. They trust you because your emotional state isn't dependent on their reactions or approval. Here's exactly how this manifests in crucial moments. Someone attacks you publicly, trying to embarrass you in front of others. The room waits for your response. Instead of defending or counter-attacking, you pause, look at them with mild curiosity and say, "I can see this is important to you." Then you turn your attention elsewhere, not dismissively, but simply because you've acknowledged their position and chosen not to engage further. What happens in that moment is alchemical. Your attacker, expecting resistance they could push against, encounters something that neither pushes back nor yields, something that simply remains itself. The audience witnesses someone who cannot be moved to lose their composure, cannot be baited into a fight, cannot be reduced to the level of drama that others operate from. Your refusal to be diminished by their attack actually diminishes them instead. Or consider this scenario: you're in a relationship and your partner accuses you of not caring enough because you don't express emotions the way they do. They're essentially demanding that you perform love according to their script. Instead of getting defensive about your communication style or explaining how you show care differently, you say, "I understand that my way of showing love doesn't always match how you receive it. Help me understand what would feel most meaningful to you." You've just accomplished something remarkable. Instead of defending your approach, you've acknowledged their experience while maintaining your autonomy. Instead of escalating the conflict, you've transformed it into a collaborative conversation. Instead of proving you care, you've demonstrated care through your willingness to bridge the communication gap. And you've done all this without sacrificing your authentic way of being. This is the mastery you've developed, the ability to remain yourself while meeting others where they are. You don't change your fundamental nature to accommodate their insecurities, but you also don't use your self-possession as a weapon against them. You've learned to be immovable without being immovable, strong without being rigid, contained without being closed. The effect ripples outward in ways you might not even notice. People begin to self-regulate in your presence, not because you've demanded it, but because your own regulation creates a field of calm that's contagious. They speak more thoughtfully, react less impulsively, consider their words more carefully. Your emotional stability becomes an anchor that others unconsciously orient themselves around. In group settings, you become a reference point for how to handle pressure. When others are getting heated in debates, they notice your calm and unconsciously moderate their own intensity. When crises arise, they look to you not because you've appointed yourself leader, but because your unshakable center makes you a natural gravitational force during chaos. Machiavelli wrote, "Men willingly believe what they wish," but he understood that people also tend to project onto mysterious figures the qualities they most admire and desire. Your restraint allows them to imagine depths of wisdom, strength, and understanding that may exceed even your own self-assessment. Your silence becomes a canvas on which they paint their ideals of what strength looks like. This isn't manipulation. It's allowing people to have the relationship with you that brings out their best selves. When they can't reduce you to their usual categories of understanding, they're forced to engage with you more thoughtfully. When they can't predict your reactions, they have to be more intentional with their approach. When they can't control your responses, they have to take responsibility for their own behavior. Here's a professional example that demonstrates the principle perfectly. You're in a team meeting where someone publicly questions a decision you made, implying incompetence or poor judgment. The room goes silent, waiting for you to defend yourself. Instead of launching into justification, you say, "I appreciate your concern about that decision. What specific outcome are you worried about?" You've just redirected the conversation from your competence to their anxiety. Instead of defending your past choice, you're inviting them to clarify their future fears. This forces them to move from attack mode to solution mode, and it demonstrates that you're secure enough in your decision-making process to explore potential improvements without taking criticism personally. The psychological shift is profound. Your colleagues witness someone who cannot be rattled by professional criticism, who can separate their ego from their work, who treats challenges as opportunities for refinement rather than threats to be repelled. This makes you appear not just competent but wise, someone whose judgment can be trusted because it's not clouded by defensive reactivity. In intimate relationships, this principle becomes even more powerful because the stakes are higher and the temptations to react are stronger. Your partner says something designed to provoke jealousy. "Your friend Mark is really attractive, isn't he?" The expected response would be to get defensive, jealous, or to probe for the deeper meaning behind the comment. Your response? "He's a good-looking guy," said with the same tone you'd use to agree that the sky is blue. No jealousy, no defensiveness, no fishing for reassurance, just acknowledgement of an obvious fact. What happens next is fascinating. Because you didn't react with insecurity, there's nothing for them to push against. Because you didn't seek reassurance, there's nothing for them to withhold. Because you remained unaffected, their test becomes irrelevant. This demonstrates something crucial about relationship dynamics. Most tests of security are actually requests for proof of strength. When people probe your boundaries or try to provoke reactions, they're often unconsciously checking whether you're solid enough to be trusted with their own vulnerabilities. Your unshakable response to their provocation actually increases their sense of safety with you. But here's where it becomes sophisticated psychology. This isn't about becoming emotionless or disconnected. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your own emotions that other people's attempts to manipulate them become irrelevant. You feel jealousy, anger, hurt, fear. You just don't let these feelings drive your responses. You experience the emotions, process them internally, and then choose your response from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. This creates a fascinating dynamic where you become more emotionally available, not less. Because you're not constantly defending against emotional attacks, you have more energy to offer genuine empathy. Because you're not reactive, people feel safer sharing their real feelings with you. Because you don't take their emotions personally, you can help them process difficult feelings without getting caught up in the drama. The cumulative effect is that you become someone people turn to during their most challenging moments. Not because you fix their problems, but because your presence allows them to think more clearly about their own solutions. Not because you give great advice, but because your calm attention helps them access their own wisdom. Not because you're superior to their struggles, but because your emotional regulation creates space for them to regulate themselves. This is where the philosophy transcends personal relationships and becomes a way of being in the world. You've discovered that most human suffering comes from resistance. Resistance to what is, resistance to what others think, resistance to circumstances beyond our control. You've learned to meet life with the same calm attention you bring to human interactions. When faced with professional setbacks, you don't waste energy raging against the injustice or defending your competence to skeptics. You assess the situation clearly, adapt your strategy, and move forward with the same steady determination you'd apply to any other challenge. Your colleagues watch you navigate difficulties with grace and begin to understand that real strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you handle yourself while you're down. When confronted with social rejection or criticism, you don't exhaust yourself trying to change minds or win approval from people who've already decided against you. You understand that some people will never understand you. Some circles will never accept you. Some perspectives will never align with yours. Instead of fighting these realities, you focus your energy on building relationships with people who appreciate what you offer. When dealing with family dynamics or old patterns of interaction, you don't get pulled back into familiar roles and reactions. You remain yourself, calm, present, responsive, but not reactive, even when others are trying to provoke you into old patterns. This often forces family systems to evolve because you're no longer playing your expected part in dysfunctional cycles. The deeper truth you've discovered is that most people are in constant negotiation with reality, constantly trying to make things other than what they are. They argue with their circumstances, fight against other people's opinions, resist their own limitations, and exhaust themselves trying to control outcomes that are largely beyond their influence. You've learned to work with reality instead of against it. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. It means clear-eyed assessment of what can be changed and what must be accepted, then directing your energy toward effective action rather than futile resistance. This conservation of energy allows you to be far more effective when action is actually called for. Consider how this plays out during conflicts. Most people escalate conflicts by meeting aggression with aggression, criticism with defensiveness, accusations with counter-accusations. They get pulled into the other person's emotional state and react from there, which usually makes everything worse. You've learned to remain in your own emotional state, regardless of what others are experiencing. When someone is angry at you, you don't get angry back. You stay curious about their experience while maintaining your own center. When someone criticizes you, you don't get defensive. You consider whether there's useful feedback embedded in their criticism while refusing to accept their emotional judgment of your worth. This creates a profound shift in how conflicts unfold. Instead of two people escalating each other's reactivity, you have one person escalating against someone who remains steady. The contrast becomes obvious to everyone involved, including the person who's escalating. They begin to see their own behavior reflected in your calm, and they often naturally de-escalate to match your energy rather than continuing to fight against your stability. Here's a specific example of how this works in practice. Someone confronts you aggressively. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? The reactive response would be to deny the accusation and counterattack. No, I don't, and actually you're the one who... Your response: it sounds like something I did made you feel dismissed. That wasn't my intention. Can you help me understand what happened? You've just transformed an attack into a conversation. Instead of defending against their accusation, you've acknowledged their feeling. Instead of taking their interpretation personally, you've redirected toward understanding. Instead of escalating the conflict, you've created space for resolution. And you've done all this while maintaining your dignity and refusing to accept their characterization of your motives. The result is that they're now faced with someone who cannot be reduced to their assumptions, cannot be provoked into proving their accusations correct, and cannot be engaged in the kind of conflict they were expecting. This forces them to either escalate to obvious unreasonableness, which exposes them, or step back and engage more constructively, which resolves the issue. This is the mastery you've developed across all areas of life, the ability to remain yourself, regardless of what others are doing or saying or feeling. You don't get pulled into other people's emotional states, manipulated by their tactics, or reduced to their level of operation. You maintain your own standard of behavior, independent of how others are behaving. The philosophical implications are staggering. You've essentially achieved a form of psychological independence that most people never develop. Your sense of self isn't dependent on external validation. Your peace isn't contingent on others' approval. Your worth isn't determined by others' opinions, and your behavior isn't controlled by others' provocations. This doesn't make you cold or disconnected. It makes you free. Free to love without neediness, free to succeed without arrogance, free to help without enabling, free to engage without losing yourself. You can be fully present with others because you're not constantly defending or promoting yourself. You can offer genuine empathy because you're not afraid of being contaminated by their emotions. Machiavelli understood that the prince must learn to be both fox and lion. But you've discovered something he only hinted at. The greatest power comes from being neither predator nor prey, but something entirely different, a force of nature that simply is what it is, regardless of circumstances. You've sealed those doors not from weakness, but from strength. Not from fear, but from wisdom. Not from inability to engage, but from the recognition that your inner life is sacred territory that should be shared selectively and protected consistently. And what remains is a stillness that cannot be pierced, a center that cannot be moved, a presence that transforms every space it enters simply by refusing to be diminished by it. This is your power, complete ownership of yourself in a world full of people who are constantly being owned by their reactions, their insecurities, their need for approval, their fear of rejection. While they fight battles on every front, you've withdrawn to an impregnable fortress that no one can attack because it exists beyond their reach. And from that fortress, you engage the world on your terms, offering your gifts freely while never allowing anyone to take what you haven't chosen to give. The silence you've cultivated isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibility. The restraint you've developed isn't limitation, it's the ultimate freedom. The boundaries you've built aren't walls, they're the foundation from which you can safely love, create, and contribute without losing yourself in the process. You've discovered the secret that most people never learn, that true power doesn't announce itself, doesn't defend itself, doesn't explain itself. True power simply is, and you've sealed those doors, and what remains is a stillness that cannot be pierced.